My good friends, allow me to start by wishing everyone peace in our hearts. First of all, I want to congratulate the Long Island Spiritist Society for making this event possible. Doing a movement for the first time in such an isolated place, isolated from the Spiritist movement, it's a great hardship. And I think it's vital that we recognize the effort of those who are working voluntarily to make this possible. Thank you so much. It's vital that we recognize it in a very honest way. Those were fake applauses. I want real applauses. I say this because it is very difficult to do voluntary work, especially when those around don't understand the importance of voluntary work. So if we're not yet volunteering ourselves, the least that we can do is to support, is to recognize and stimulate those who are doing it for the betterment of all. Once again, thank you so much. I am glad to participate and be part of a team of a good Spiritist lecturers, and also my dear friends, Jussara, Adriano, Kirsten, Allison. Thank you so much for allowing me to be one amongst you guys. We are a team. And since it's the afternoon, we have eaten, we have drank some coffee, let's start the lecture in a different way. We are a very close group of friends. I think we could make this fun as well, right? Very good. There were two friends, John and Joseph. Both of them, they had farms. And obviously they used horses to work in their farms. One day John wakes up and he finds out that the only horse that he had escaped. The fence was broken and now he was gone. Naturally, he became desperate. He ran to his friend's house, Joseph. Joseph by far could see that something was terribly wrong with John. John approached and Joseph asked, "What's going on? Why do you look so disturbed?" And he said, "Well, you know I have one horse. And this horse is the life of my farm. And today he escaped and now I'm going crazy. What am I going to do?" And Joseph says to John, "Well, in life, you never know." "What do you mean in life you never know?" You never know when something happens to you, if it's good or bad, if it's positive or negative, if it's a problem or a solution. Let's see if you can repeat that with me. You never know in life if something is or positive, problem. Let's do that again as if we are alive in the flesh. Okay? Once again, you never know if in life, if something happens to you, it's good or bad. Positive, negative, problem, solution. And then John looks at Joseph and said, "What are you talking about? What kind of crazy philosophy is this? I had one horse and this horse is gone. What am I supposed to do? If you don't have anything better to say, shut up and leave me alone." You could see how peaceful this guy was. So he left. 24 hours passed by and here comes John again, but now he looks much peaceful. And then Joseph looks at John and said, "I could see something definitely changed. What happened?" "Well, yesterday when I told you that my horse was gone, he actually went up to the mountains. And there he found 9 wild horses. And you know, horses are just like women. They could talk forever. So they built strong relationships. And at the end of the day, when my horse decided to come back home, all the other 9 horses followed him. So this morning when I woke up, voila, I had 10 horses running around my farm. Isn't that great? But Joseph said, be careful. In life, you never know if something is
good or bad, positive or negative, problem or solution.
What are you talking about? How could this be a problem? How this could be negative? I had one horse, now I have 10 of them. This is great. And so he was gone. 24 hours passed by again, and here comes John, all frustrated. What happened now, said Joseph? Well, yesterday when I was telling you about the 9 wild horses plus my other horse, my oldest son, the one that helps me around the farm, he decided to ride in one of the wild horse. And because the horse was wild, guess what happened? He was very fast, so he kept speeding up and speeding up. My son made all the effort to hold on to this horse, but he couldn't. So he fell from the horse and he broke both of his legs. Now he's useless. Well, be careful, because in life you never know if
Good, bad, positive, negative, problem, solution.
Shut up, said John to Joseph. I am tired of your philosophy. How this could be good? How this could be positive? I had a perfect healthy son to help me around the farm, and now he's useless. So he left. 24 hours passed by. This is the final day of the conversation, and here comes John, all apologetic to Joseph. I am sorry, but you were right the entire time. Yesterday, when I was telling you about my son's broken legs, our country declared war in the neighboring country. So the army came here, and the captain, he came to recruit my son so he could fight in the front line. But when the captain looked at my son's broken legs, he said, this guy is useless. So my son's life was saved because he had broken legs. Everything in life, it's about perception, how we see it. And mental illness, as far as the scientific community goes, it has a complete distorted perception of what mental illness is. And it's much influenced by the pharmaceutical company. In order for psychiatrists, social workers, and psychologists to diagnose people with a certain kind of a mental illness, they refer to a book called DSM. And the latest edition is the DSM-5. It was revised in the year 2012. And in this 5th edition, this book grew so large that if you read it, I'll guarantee you, you will find a mental illness that fits your description. Because the purpose of the pharmaceutical company is to get everybody drugged. They want to make sure that you have some sort of a symptom that you are dependent on their magic pill to have your problem healed. Because this revision, the DSM-5, 70% of those who voted for the revision, 70%, they have ties with the pharmaceutical companies. I'll give you a very small example. They change the time of your symptoms in order to be in order for people to be more diagnosed with a certain kind of illness. For example, for anorexia nervosa, this is the condition in which the girl, she thinks she is fat, or the boy as well, but it happens more in girls. It doesn't matter how thin she is. She looks at herself in the mirror and she sees herself being obese, so she would try to maintain an unhealthy weight. And one of the conditions for the diagnosis of anorexia back in the DSM-4 was a condition in which her period must stop. The lack of menstruation should be there in order to be one of conditions to be diagnosed with anorexia. Now with the DSM-5, that condition doesn't have to be there anymore, which means more people will be diagnosed with anorexia. So unfortunately, as we learned in Spiritism from the highly evolved spirits, greed, selfishness is the scourge of our society. Because whenever financial interests are there, the primary purpose would not be to help, but actually to gain. Therefore, we must be very careful with these diagnoses. Just imagine if you're feeling a certain kind of way and you go to your psychiatrist, you are not just the patient, you became the client. And the psychiatrist needs to make a living. Therefore, if you get healed, what happens to his client? We just are becoming aware. We're just coming out of the cloud of disturbance from the epidemic of ADHD. You're acting a certain way. Your parents were extra busy. They got home. They were tired. You wanted their attention. You kept jumping around. You went to school. Your teacher was not the most inspired person, so she made boring classes. And the kid kept jumping around, so there's something wrong with my kid. Let me take him to see a psychiatrist. And then a pill was given to a brain that is in the process of being developed. And instead of helping, we have caused much damage. Because the amount of children that were prescribed these antidepressants, very strong mood stabilizers, that even for the adult brain is very dangerous. It was astounding. But the pharmaceutical companies, they loved the fact that all of our children were being prescribed these medications. There are so many lawsuits that goes on against these pharmaceutical companies. The last one was for $32 billion. A suit of $32 billion. Now, do you think that pharmaceutical company care about the suit? Not at all. You know why? Because they made so much money off the medication that $32 billion was nothing for them. And of course, I will not mention the pharmaceutical company because there's a chance I might be arrested after I leave this room. I want to address this topic very carefully for the simple fact that we all want to believe that a pill can fix our problems. We want to believe that it's that easy, but it's not. From the materialistic point of view, and that's the wrong perception of seeing the problem, mental illness is nothing but a result of genetic default, a problem with our genes. And the statistic goes, following the Mendelian genetic philosophy, you inherited two types of genes. You have your dominant gene, your recessive gene. Then you have another set of dominant and recessive genes from your parents. So if your mother has a recessive gene for depression, that means you have 1/4, 25% of chance of being depressed. If you have inherited from your father and your mother recessive genes for depression, that means you have 50% of having depression. But if your mother and your father were depressed, that means they had dominant genes for depression, it's guaranteed that you're going to have depression. And there are so many in the scientific field that considers psychiatrists and psychiatry a complete flaw. It's not science for many scientists. This is not our insignificant opinion. Scientists. Why? Because there's no physical evidence to determine if you are mentally ill or not. Let's say you have high blood pressure. What's the physical evidence that we have high blood pressure? Well, you measure your blood pressure, and if it's high, if it's above 120, you have high blood pressure. How come we can detect diabetes? So you draw blood. If you have more glucose in your blood, that means you have diabetes. There is no physical test that one can conduct in order to detect mental illness. Those who argue in favor that mental illness has a genetic cause, they say the problem is within our synapses. Now, I don't want to make you go nuts here with all the scientific information because this is not a scientific class. We must be very careful to make a Spiritist lecture a Spiritist one. But I'll give you some brief points on their argument. You are an organism. This is the materialistic point of view. Your organism is made up of organs. Your lung, your kidneys. What is the biggest organ in our body? Your skin. Have you thought of your organ, of your skin as an organ? And then you have your brain. Organs are made up of what? Of tissues, and tissues are made up of cells. And the cells that make up your brain, it's called neurons. So the reason you're able to see, think, feel, it's because the neurons inside your brain are communicating with one another. How? Well, sending from one neuron to the other neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters happened within the synapses. These are small gaps between one neuron and the other. So the story goes that if you have a lack of serotonin, you have depression. If you have too much of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter, you have bipolar, which is the opposite of depression. It's when you have moments of euphoria. It's what they call mania. You feel that you are Superman, a Spider-Man. And on the opposite end, this is the bipolar side, from one polar to the other, you're completely depressed. And why? Because you lack serotonin. So for that, since we have a lack of chemicals, we need to produce more chemicals. And then the psychiatrist will prescribe a kind of medication that is it's categorized as SSRI. And I'll explain to you what that means. He will first ask you 3 questions. How do you feel? Well, I feel terrible. How is your appetite? I'm not eating. How's your sleep? I'm not sleeping at all. Well, this is it. You have depression. Here it is, the magic solution. And we want to believe that this is the magic solution. The most important question that you barely hear it is, why do you feel this way? It's simply asking questions of how do you feel. So he will give you a Prozac, Celexa, Zoloft. What these medications will do, when a neuron sends neurotransmitter to another neuron, a serotonin, for example, if the serotonin is not absorbed by the postsynaptic neuron, the neuron that sent it will reabsorb that serotonin, or the body will absorb and the person will not have enough serotonin going to the other neurotransmitter. So this medication, the antidepressant medication, what actually does, it blocks the serotonin from being reuptaken. And the result, you have more serotonin at the synapse, which will make the communication possible. That is the theory behind why people have depression, why people are diagnosed with this certain kind of disease. But my friends, this is all a theory. No one ever saw this under a microscope. And it is impossible for this to be a genetic problem for the simple fact that the arithmetics do not work. We have about 100 billion neurons inside our brain. Jussara said that we have 70 trillion cells in our entire body. So out of those 70 trillion cells, we have 100 billion neurons. But each neuron has about 10 to 30,000 dendrites. The dendrites, it's what make the communication possible. These are the arms of one neuron to communicate with the other neuron. So there are more communications go inside your brain than stars in the heaven. Because if you multiply 100 billion times 10,000, that gives you approximately a quadrillion number. Quadrillion number. This is one with 16 zeros after it, of communications inside your brain. But the genetic theory states that the genes is responsible for this problem at the synaptic level. For that to be true, we cannot have only 30,000 genes, because what science tells us is that we have approximately 30,000 genes that is responsible for your height, for the color of your hair, for the color of your eyes. So when you do the math, from the genetic point of view, it is impossible for mental illness to have a genetic foundation. The point we're trying to make is that this is not a genetic problem per se. The cause of the problem is not genetic. Just in our story with John and Joseph, the perception will dictate your emotions will dictate your actions. As long as the scientific community keeps seeing that mental illness is a result of a lack or of an excess of a certain chemical inside our brain, their solution will always be to add chemicals in form of pill to balance this imbalance. From the Spiritist perspective, mental illness is a result of a lack of faith, idleness, and satiety. This is question 843 of the Spirit's book. Allan Kardec, he asked the highly evolved spirits, why people become depressed? They have this lack of empathy for life. Why? And they give 3 different causes: lack of faith, idleness, and satiety. If an individual has a lack of faith, that means their perception of life, it's very negative. If you think that life won't go beyond after death, what's the point of trying to overcome your barriers? Why do we need faith for? We need faith to have certainty of our tomorrow. When you are certain of what's going to happen to you, and tomorrow is Sunday, it doesn't matter what you're facing Saturday. You'll be able to remain at ease. You'll be poised. You'll be confident that whatever problem you're facing, it's not there to destroy you. It's not there to make you suffer, but rather is there to empower you. Although you would not be jumping out of joy, you would not fall into a state of despair. What is despair? Despair is our uncertainty of tomorrow. When I'm in a state of despair, whatever I'm facing today, it becomes unbearable. Unbearable. So you might find people who have a religious label on themselves. And then you ask them, why are you getting into all this trouble? Why have you resorted to this kind of solution? Don't you have a faith? And they always say, yes, I'm a Catholic, I'm a Protestant, I'm a Jew, I'm a Muslim. Yet your knowledge did not serve you when you most needed, in a moment of problems, in a moment that could allow you to a state of despair. Because what you find out in dealing with people on a daily basis, it's not that they had a problem, it's always how they handled that problem, which was so poorly handled, and they multiplied the original problem that they had because they had a negative perception of their challenges. Spiritism provides us a very solid faith. Why? Because it's based on logic and reasoning. No Spiritist speaker should stand here and say, believe in this because I told you to do so. You will never read in the Spiritist codification Allan Kardec saying, this is the way you should believe. You wouldn't find those words. What you'll find is ponder about this. Put your mind to work. Let logic and reasoning tell you, guide you. And you will always see that things make sense. And when we are able to believe because we understood, our faith will be very strong. It's why Allan Kardec said, an unshakable faith, which can meet reason face to face in every human epoch. What that means, when we understand what life is all about, it doesn't matter what happens to us, we'll be able to overcome the challenge because we know life is not against us. So lack of faith will lead people to depression. So in our story, picture John waking up that day. And he looks around the farm and he sees the only horse that he had is gone. And since he has no faith of what's going to happen tomorrow, he thinks that life is against him. He comes back home to let his wife know what happened. And before he even opened up his mouth, his wife says to him, how many times I told you, fix up your bed after you wake up. What do you think John's reaction would be to his wife? Do you think he would say, honey, I'm so sorry. Let me fix it right now. What he would do? He would go back there, scream at his wife. Here I am. The only horse we have is gone, and you're concerned about me fixing the bed? Leave me alone. She would say to him, you know what? If this is the way you're going to talk to me, go eat breakfast somewhere else. So he leaves the house. He gets to the nearest store. The store owner says to him, good morning. And he looks at him and says, what's so good about this morning? Don't you see all the rain out there? Are you blind? You deal with these people every day, don't you? And then later on, that same day, the man that sells the food for his horse come to get his money. Listen, I've been selling you the food for the past 3 months. You owe me money. What would be his reaction to this guy? Money? I don't even have a horse to feed, and you want money from me? Get out of here. Listen, if you don't pay me right now, I'm going to charge 20% interest in what you already owe me. So because he had this perception that life was against him, that this problem, the horse being gone, was something against him, he created 3 additional unnecessary problems. Unnecessary. You hear a lot of people saying problems, they shape us. Challenges, they shape us. Yes, it's true. But we only go through suffering because we choose to do so. We can love instead by reading, by understanding, by being humble and listening to others, and by learning from their experience. I don't have to create my own painful experience to learn. I could simply learn from someone else. That's called humbleness. But if I have pride and arrogance, oh, I know everything. That's how proud people are. There's no room to learn because they think they already know everything. So we only learn through pain because of our stubbornness. If we have love, humbleness, we learn from other people. So he gets to a state of despair for the simple fact that this is the perception he had. The world is against him. But on the following day, what happened? He goes out there and he sees that he has 10 horses. He comes to tell his wife, and his wife says to him, how many times I have to tell you, clean up the room, fix up your bed? What would be his reaction now? Oh, I'm so sorry, honey. I'll do it right now. And then he goes to the same store, get breakfast. This time, the guy is even scared to say good morning to him. He's the one that tells the guy, you know, what a beautiful morning, don't you think? The man looks at him and says, well, don't you see rain out there? Yes, but the water is good for the plants, for the trees. Nature loves water. And then later on that same day, that same man that came yesterday charging him 20% interest on top of what he owed says, where's my money? He says, yes, let's work up a payment plan. As a matter of fact, I even have more horses to feed. I have to buy more food from you. So these were the same 3 problems he had on the previous day, but he dealt with them in a completely different way. Why? Because he changed the perception of his problems. It's all about perception. So Spiritism gives us a perception of life that is completely different than what we have heard, for the simple fact that tells us to think in rational ways, with logic. It must make sense. So having a strong faith helps us with our mental illness. Second, being laziness, idleness. It's one of the main causes of mental illness according to the Spiritist view. Why? My friends, you heard the saying before, an empty mind is the devil's playground. You heard that saying before? When we don't have nothing to do, we have too much mental time to think of garbage, to think of negative things that happen to us. From the Spiritist perspective, the reason why it's so dangerous to have idle time, it's because those who are obsessing us from the spiritual world, those who have created animosity due to our pride and selfishness from previous reincarnations, now they are our enemies in the spiritual side. We call them spiritual obsessors. People like you and I who are full of anger towards what we have done to them. And what they do, since they have the entire time in the world to study us, to observe our imperfections, they try to find us in moments of idleness. Moments that we're not thinking of anything. Our hands are not being productive. That's when we give them the mental space for them to obsess us. And at those moments, they would not create something in your mind. They would try to see what kind of material you have added into your mind for them to enhance, magnify that material. I'll give you an example. Let's say you're idle at home and you're flipping through channels, and suddenly you stop in a channel about a movie. And in this movie, it shows somebody's wife cheating on the guy. She's not home. This lady from the movie is supposed to get home at 5 o'clock, and it's 5:30 and she's not there. And in the movie shows that she's with someone else from the job. Suddenly this guy, he asks himself, where is my wife? She's supposed to be at home at 6, and it's already 6:40, and she's not home. The poor lady is just stuck in traffic. And now the spiritual obsessor will use this information to disturb this individual. So for those 40 minutes that he's waiting for his wife, he is creating all the mental image in this person's mind with her and this other guy from her job having an intimate relationship together. When she gets home, he doesn't even allow her to explain what was going on. Where were you? And this huge fight will break out. Where that came from? Idleness, together with polluting our mind. Mental illness always has a moral component. In the book, In the Greater World, it shows psychiatric hospitals in the spiritual world. And in that book, we see the affirmation that mental illness is nothing but a moral problem. Our body doesn't create the mental illness. Our body reflects the moral illness. Especially if the individual is full of guilt. With his guilt, he will disturb his perispirit, and the perispirit will produce a reaction in the physical body. You don't even have to be a spiritist to understand that our thoughts, it's what construct our brain. Let's say we open up a book here, and this book, it describes an intimate scene. Do I have to be more clear? Yes or no? I want to be careful with the words because we have teenagers. And in this book describes an intimate scene. By us listening carefully to the description of the scene between two people, you would notice a physical reaction in your body. Nobody has touched you. Nobody's even sitting next to you, yet you notice a physical reaction in your body. For males and females alike. This is a thought producing a physical reaction. So if I have a thought, my life is terrible. I hate my work. I'll never forgive. What are we doing to our brain? To the chemicals that are being produced in the hypothalamus, to be more specific. We are sending all these negative chemicals, peptides. They are very destructive to this organism that produces disease. So the mental illness is the result of a moral problem. And idleness is the biggest enemy for whoever has any kind of mental illness. Idleness is bad for everyone, but especially for those who are mentally ill. And if there is one way the system really damages people who have mental illness, they let the individual know, listen, you are incapable of work. Let's get a piece of the money for those who work. That's what we call taxes. And now we're going to pay for this guy to sit at home and take pills. Because if you're incapable to work, somebody has to pay for your living. Now, if this man is sick because he hates someone or he's feeling remorseful for something that he did, that's what causes his depression. Now he has the entire time of the world to think of the negative things that happened to him. One of the most prevalent illnesses right now is PTSD. We all know what that stands for. Post-traumatic stress syndrome. Post-traumatic stress disorder. An individual goes to war, he sees horrible things, he's part of horrible scenes, and then he comes home and he's unable to sleep. Why? Because of the things he has seen or what he has experienced during the war. So then he says, I have these thoughts, and a psychiatrist will say, well, what you have is PTSD, and you can't work. So now just imagine this individual sitting at home, and all the images that he saw, he has this tape, videotape playing in his mind over and over and over again. And since memories are made by neuron connections through the dendrites, the more you think of something, the more the connection is getting stronger. So not only we haven't solved any of the problem, we just intensify the magnitude of the problem because he has time to play that tape over and over again. According to the highly evolved spirits, the best medication one can give is work. Work, work, work. Especially if it's physical work. You're not thinking about your past. You're not anxious about what's going to happen in the future. You're at the moment with your hands busy at work. And that tape is not being played. If you have something that disturbs you, if you have a negative information that bothers you, that happened 5 years ago, something that you have done or someone did to you, and that negative memory, it's one of the reasons for your mental illness, for your depression, was Joanna Evangelist, a psychologist from the great beyond, where she says we need to practice thought substitution. Thought substitution. Whenever that negative thought comes to your mind, think of something positive. Let's say someone punched you in the face. That's the negative thought. You think of that day, it happened in the year 2005, you feel disturbed. You feel you want to attack the other individual. So whenever that thought pops into your mind, don't sit there and think about the details, what they said to you before they did this to you. Immediately practice thought substitution. Remind yourself of someone who hugged you instead. How come we don't play over and over the tape of hugging? Why do we have to play the tape of getting punched? It's amazing how our memories are so selective. We have incredible memory to think of the pain others have caused us. But our memory is very weak when it comes to remember the pain we have caused in other people. Our memory is excellent to remind ourselves of good things that we have done towards other people. But our memory is very weak to remember the good things that others have done to us. Therefore, we are masochists. We choose what hurts us instead of what helps us. And idle time will produce the mental illness because we are recollecting, unfortunately most of the time, the negative memory. The third reason for mental illness, according to the spirits, are satiety. What is satiety? Having too much of everything. And nothing pleases you. When we have too much, when everything is easy, what happens? There is no value to it. And if there is an information that is fed in our mind by societies in general, is the fact that if you have, you are happy. By having a house, the latest car, you should be happy. When you ask someone, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing fine. My bank account is all right. I paid my mortgage. I'm doing good. That's their definition of doing good, having things. So if we go by that definition, mental illness is a result of not having things. If money equals happiness, then being poor equals misery. And the epitome of feeling miserable is suicide. Therefore, the data should show us that suicides happen amongst the poorest country in the planet. But that's not what the data shows. Just the opposite. The richest countries in the world is where you have the highest rate of suicide. Why? Because of too much of everything. I just want a house. When I get it, I'm happy. People just want things. Just want money. And money will not suffice to attend to our spiritual needs. And if we have spiritual needs that are not being met, we will starve. Spiritually, we're sick, and the body will reflect the sickness, the illnesses. And that's what we call mental illness. Why do we want things for? We want things to fulfill three basic needs. The need to eat, to sleep, and reproduce, have sex. But when you look at a cat, a dog, a mouse, what are they doing? They're existing. They are sleeping, having sex, and eating. So here we are, human beings, full of potential. And yet, we limit our lives to live a life of a cat, a dog, a mouse. And that difference of what we ought to be and what we have limited ourselves to be creates an existential void, an emptiness inside us. And we try to fulfill that emptiness with cigarettes, alcohol, marijuana, like Adriano said this morning, heroin, cocaine. But the hole is not getting fulfilled. The hole just keeps getting bigger and bigger. Now we need more of the same substance to try to cover the previous hole. And that explains the progressive nature of any addiction. Because the hole is getting bigger. Even food. You know, people try to cover that hole with food. I mean, I cover my hole with this food today. I had a hole in my stomach. And Deuce's food was delicious, wasn't it? Yeah. Woo! Talking about carving a hole. The time that I have.
You have 1 hour.
Yeah, but what time I'm supposed to be done? No one told me. 10 minutes? Thank you. Whenever we feel the hole, we want to cover that hole with medication as well. Because we are completely in denial of what really is going on. We want to reject the idea that pain is useful. The reason why we feel empty in the inside, the reason why we can't sleep, the reason our mood is bad, the reason our appetite goes down, it's because we are receiving a message from our subconsciousness. Because our subconsciousness, that's where we have the information, what we're supposed to do with our lives. This is the God within us. Our subconsciousness is trying to communicate us something. And that it is a disturbed feeling. Pain has its purpose in our lives. Let's say this microphone is fire. You put your hand on top of the fire. Do you keep your hand there? Yes or no? No. You quickly remove it because you feel pain. Imagine you remove the pain receptors away from your hand, and now you put your hand on top of this fire. What's going to happen now? In about a half an hour, my hand is gone. All I have is just a wrist. So this experiment proves to us the usefulness of pain. That pain protects me. It sends me a powerful message. And what's the message of pain? Change. Change what? Change my hand's location. And I'm able to save it. So whenever I feel disgust, frustrated, angry, sad, depressed, that is an information telling me to do one thing. And that is to do what? Change. Change what? Change my perception of the problem. Change how I look at myself. Change how I look life. Because if I keep seeing the problem from the same angle, I'll keep trying to solve the problem with the wrong solution. I'll create more problems on top of problems instead of solving the initial problem. So as long as we have the materialistic perception of mental illness, our suicide rates will keep going high. Unfortunately, this year alone, we had 2 very famous tragic suicides. And immediately, one of them, and I will respect the family by not mentioning their names, immediately when that one committed suicide, the first thing that the fans did was to type in the Twitter, "Free at last. Free at last. Jeannie, you are free." What is the subliminal message we're sending? If you have pain, kill yourself, and then you're going to be free. Even the APA, American Psychiatric Association, went ahead and asked the people, stop tweeting this stuff. Because you're glamorizing suicide. Before you know it, we have teenagers trying to meet with their fan. And then we have this other girl who went ahead and to say that she couldn't stand the pain anymore. So she put a video on YouTube explaining that she did not want her family to go through that pain. So she wanted to end her life. What's the result of that? A materialistic point of view. If you still exist, the pain will be there. And we don't accuse the girl. Neither we are against the actor. That's not the point. Spiritism is not about judging people. It's about clarifying. And when we read in the Spirit's book, the reasons that people commit suicide, there are many of them. What about the consequences? Many of them. But if there is one consequence that all suicides share, is the fact that they all will meet disappointment. What is disappointment? Well, they're trying to run away from the pain, and all they have found is more pain. It's a very selfish move, because we're not thinking about the pain of the others who stay behind. Someone who killed themselves, they are killing part of their family with them. Because those who are left behind will ask themselves, what could we have done to prevent this? And we didn't. This is why it's a selfish move, because they're thinking only about their pain. But what do they care if they are materialists? Because they won't be feeling any pain. They won't be feeling any remorse against the family, because they're gone. That's their way of thinking. But for them to get to the other side and see what happened, what's going on with their family, the problem is intensified 100,000-fold. On the following day, his daughter said, I would never understand my father. How could a man who was so loved do this against himself? That was his daughter who said that. From that, we can at least find some sort of conclusion how this girl feels about the decision that her father made. The suicide statistics shows that 85-year-older gentlemen are the most prevalent in taking their own lives. 85 years old. And we Spiritists understand that some of these people, they were within weeks of the natural death. 85 years old. Within weeks. And now they have to repeat the entire journey again because they couldn't wait for another week or so. For those who take their lives because of a broken heart. It's very different from taking your life because you had a financial problem, from taking your life because your loved one did not want you. So you took your own life. For them, this is the pain. Once they get on the other side and they're looking at their loved one, the years are going by. And one day they meet them when they're 80-year-old. The loved one is now 80 years old. And they look at this person that says, they say, is this what I killed myself for? This ugly thing? I can't believe that would be the super desperate moment. Because the moment they took their lives, when they're 25 years old, maybe she looked great. But now that she's 90, that will be the super pain right there. Realizing that this is the reason why I took my life away. When you take your life because of financial reasons, and then you discover that the most important things in life is not about money. It's about who you are. I'm so sorry. Therefore, Spiritism is here to give us a different perception on mental illness and all the other diseases. It's always a moral component. If something disturbs you, if you know someone who has depression because of what they have done in the past, all problems are fixable. We have the right to make mistakes, but we have the obligation to repair them. Why do we have the right? It's our right as individuals who are learning in the process of evolution. God did not create us perfect. He created us with the potential to achieve perfection. So in the process, many of our learning would take place with negative and positive experiences. So if you have done something really negative and that disturbs you, forgive yourself. What is to forgive yourself? It's not to applaud the behavior. It's not to erase the behavior. It is to tell yourself, I've done it, now it's my obligation to fix it. And I have the power to fix it. Well, I don't have the power to fix it because I am remorseful because the person I have done wrong to, now he lives in Japan. How am I going to get in contact with him? That's not the problem. The good that you do anywhere becomes your lawyer everywhere to defend you. This is why Spiritism preaches. There is no salvation without charity. Charity here is doing good always. And as you do good to others, we are cleaning up our past. So for someone who's suffering from depression, what would you say to that person? Get a job. Start working. Change your perception of life. This is not something against you. This is something for you. The depression here comes from a subconscious memory of something they have done in the past and they're unable to forgive themselves. They were reincarnated, forced in order to repair the mistake, and they don't want to repair the mistake. This is where they get the depression. This is why I can't sleep. This is why I don't feel good. By changing that perception, you're not what you have, you are what you are. It's not what you have that makes you the individual. It's you improving yourself that makes you special. By changing that perception, will bring him faith. By understanding that work is health, we always will keep ourselves busy. And when I say work, it's not necessarily get a profession. Maybe we lack a profession because we don't have a university degree, but there's always work to do. The carpet is always dirty. It seems that way. There's always dishes to do, always grass to cut, or someone else's grass to cut. The point is to be busy. When you go to a nursing home, what makes old people feel old is that the family stashed them away, and now they feel useless. So what makes someone feel old is not their age in the calendar, is the uselessness that they feel. By becoming useful, now we feel important. Somebody needs us. Because if there is a need that we have, it's to be needed. So work will be the solution. And third, if you lack things, appreciate the fact that you lack. Because by lacking these things, if they were there in your life, that would not be convenient. If we had excess money, that becomes very, very dangerous in our hands. Money itself, it's neutral. It's what we do with it that could either demote or promote us. And unfortunately, because of our past, it ends up by demoting us. To appreciate what we lack in order to consider what we have. We are so concentrated in the things that we don't have that we completely disregard the things that we lack, that we have. This is why when we pray, we should be thankful. It's not that God needs to hear us saying thank you. God doesn't need to hear our words. This state of thankfulness is for us to realize what we have. Because when we stop to concentrate and outnumber the things that we have, to pinpoint what we have, we realize that we have. Thank you for my health. Oh, I have health. I didn't know. Thank you for my wife, my husband, for my job. It's amazing how people go through life not experiencing happiness. And what usually they found out is that they would look at their past life and say, past life here right now, 5 years, 10 years ago, and they would say, I was so happy back then, and I didn't know I was that happy. Why do we need to suffer to realize that we were happy before? Why not experience happiness as it happened? Small example. If you have a dog, most of you have dogs? Yeah. When you get home, this is the highlight of his day. You'll get home. He jumps on you. He barks at you. He runs around you. It's a party for the dog. Why are we not experiencing the party with the dog, you know? I wonder. But the day you get home and this dog is laid down on the floor, he can't move, he's dead, that's the day we will realize how wonderful it was to experience the joy of being greeted by the dog. Why do we have to wait for the dog to be dead to experience the joy of being received by the dog? That's what being thankful is all about. I'm saying this because Thanksgiving is coming up. And there's nothing thankful about the Thanksgiving process. Usually we're eating turkey until we passed out. And we are saying bad things about the relatives that are not present. And not a word of thankfulness happened. You know? And then we experience depression. Being thankful for the things that we have to experience the joy. A moral component. That's the cause of mental illness, which will lead to an illness that we are in sync with. It could be schizophrenia, autism, bipolar, depression. Go to DSM-5 and they make sure you have one of them. But be very careful in getting into pills. Medication are for a very selective few people. I'm not saying do not take medication at all. What I'm saying, that medication is not the solution per se. It's a crutch that might allow you to start walking, and then eventually you leave that crutch on the floor and you do the walk by yourself. That is the message that we get from the spirits. Work, work, work. This is why the spirits, they come back to let us know that we are the cause of the problem. Therefore, we are the solution to them. Thank you so much for your attention.